around the world, there are great herds of herbivores: yaks, horses, cows, goats, reindeer, sheep or camels, led by itinerant herders, some 40 million nomads that still today cling to their traditional way of life. Though it is not known for certain, it is believed that man was originally sedentary. The groups of hominids and possibly thousands of years later the first primitive humans did not dare or did not need to leave their small territory. It would be several thousand years before man, now having mastered his environment, was capable of venturing out to increasingly distant lands. He decided to explore what lay beyond the horizon. It would seem that the origins of nomadic life can be traced back to the Neolithic era, when the harshness of the climate forced groups of humans to go in search of more temperate regions. During this period, 99% of humanity was nomadic. Only a few lived settled lives in the more benign regions. Man began to domesticate certain herbivores such as the horse, which he used to drive the herds from one area of pasture to another with the changing seasons. These journeys made a decisive contribution to the spread of ideas, beliefs, and cultures. Thanks to the horse, the nomadic peoples were capable of founding and consolidating some of the largest empires in history, such as those of Genghis Khan, Saladin, or Attila. At the start of the 20th century, the nomads began to be threatened by sedentary agricultural peoples who fenced in and plowed up the lands across which they had traditionally traveled. Today, different governments are trying to persuade the last nomads to adopt a sedentary lifestyle, to stop their wanderings, abandon their never-ending journey. They represent a problem. They cross borders, do not understand the concept of sovereignty. Their world has no limits, it never did, and that today would appear to be unacceptable. It is not easy to reach the last nomadic groups still existing on our planet. They generally live in remote, inaccessible regions. Our journey to find the Tsatan in the south of Siberia was a clear example of this. The rivers were still frozen over, and we weren't sure whether the ice would hold. Our heavily loaded four-wheel drives weighed over 3,500 kilos, and we ran the risk of breaking the surface and getting trapped in the freezing cold waters of the river. Spring is the only time of year this journey is possible. The snow has disappeared, and the remaining ice of the rivers makes it possible to cross them. As there are no bridges, when the ice melts, they become impassable. Some way into the journey, the iced-over rivers no longer inspired confidence. We weren't at all sure they would be able to bear so much weight. From then on, our expedition had to travel on horseback. We were still about 140 kilometers from the vast territory of the Tsatan, and what's more, we weren't sure exactly where they would be at this time of year.
Mañana convendría que dos salieran antes que nosotros, para que buscaran dónde están los Satán.
We now advance slowly across the vast plains of the steppes on 23 horses which also carried the 500 kilos of our equipment. At night, the temperature fell to 16 or 17 degrees below zero, but we were lucky in the daytime when the sun came out and the thermometer rose to 14 or 15 degrees above zero. On the third day of our journey, we came across the first signs of the Tzatan, an abandoned camp. They had left here not long before, but which direction had they taken? The Tzatan are constantly moving from one place to another. Just a few meters away, we saw a small sanctuary, an ovo, a sacred offertory where the Tzatan leave their offerings to the gods. They are normally found on mountain peaks or at crossroads. Then we spotted another ovo on a prominence in the landscape. Our porters stopped to make offerings, and then suddenly, luck smiled on us. A horseman traveling in the opposite direction came by, and we quickly realized he was a Tzatan. He led us to his village.
Ese del Taiga.
Es verdad.
Sí, entonces ahora nosotros llevamos a él para que él nos indique.
Él sabe dónde están los
Sí,
gatos.
sí, claro.
It's customary for travelers to stop at the ovos where they make small offerings to ensure good luck, a bottle of vodka, tobacco, or hair from the horse's mane. We set off again with Hakambat, our new Tzatan friend, who took us directly to his camp in the taiga. Four hours later, we saw the first chums, the conical tents rather like the tepees of North American Indians in which the Tzatan live. We had arrived at Hakambat. The women were returning with the herds of reindeer which had spent the day grazing up on the hills. The Tzatan are also called the reindeer people, and their very existence depends on these animals. From when they are very young, they learn how to handle these antlered herbivores which can be more than 2 meters long and stand 1 meter 20 high at the croup. The first thing we noticed was how affectionate the adults were with the children. It took us very little time with them to realize that their reputation as a hostile, ferocious, savage people is totally unjustified. They are hospitable and affectionate, though, it's true, independent and proud of their way of life. They had come here at a short time before from a distant place in the mountains. At this time of year, they bring their herds down into the valleys so the pregnant females can give birth. One peculiarity of reindeer is that both males and females grow antlers, though those of females are smaller. Sometimes, before they are shed, the Tzatan cut them off. These antlers they then sell to practitioners of traditional Chinese medicine who use them to make aphrodisiacs. They are not fast or agile, but they have adapted to extremely low temperatures and are so strong they can be saddled and mounted or used to carry or pull loads. Each family has between 40 and 50 reindeer. They milk them twice a day in the early morning and at dusk. Reindeer milk forms the basis of the Tsatan's diet. From it they make butter, cream, yogurt, and a type of strong-tasting cheese called arul. Inside the chum they make the cheese. The milk is heated on the stove that stands in the center of the tent and coagulated by adding the milk of young reindeer. The chums are very simple constructions, a basic structure of sticks covered with canvases. In winter, they add skins and birch bark which provide insulation. In these tents, the Tsatan are able to survive one of the most extreme climates on the planet. From 50 degrees below zero in winter to up to 40 degrees above zero at the height of summer. The men take turns to watch over the herds to prevent them being attacked by wolves and bears. They also venture out into the taiga on hunting expeditions which can last up to a week. Shortly after daybreak, the women release the reindeer, which immediately go up into the mountains, where they will spend the day grazing. The Tsatan always camp near the snow. The reindeer have very fragile hooves, and when they walk over dry terrain, they often get wounds which can become infected, and sometimes even lead to death. The domestic chores begin with melting snow in order to obtain the water they will consume during the day. The lands of the Tsatan are very remote, and for most of the year they are cut off by the snow. Therefore they are virtually self-sufficient. Almost everything they use they make themselves, with the available resources. Even the ropes they use to tether the cattle are made from woven horsehair. They are of Siberian origin and so have lighter skin and less slanted eyes than their Mongol neighbors. They speak a language of Turkish origin. The first snows of September signal the end of the summer season. Now they must make careful preparations for the harsh winter. They gather firewood and grass to feed their cattle and slaughter a number of reindeer, starting with any that are ill. Then they dry the meat, which will serve as food until the following spring. Whether to escape from the mosquitoes in summer, the glacial temperatures of winter, or to go in search of spring pasture, the Tsatan move camp up to 8 times a year. Putting up or taking down the chums is a simple operation in which the entire family participates. Normally, several families travel together, helping each other. At the time of the Communist Revolution, collectivization was forced on the Tsatan. In 1930, the political leaders and commissars seized their reindeer in the name of the state. Many preferred to kill them rather than hand them over. The Tsatan, for whom the reindeer had always been vital to survival, could not understand those absurd rules. They began to receive a monthly salary which forced them to travel to distant places to get food, and if they lost an animal, they were punished with a heavy economic sanction. It seemed like the end of their nomadic lifestyle. But with the fall of the Soviet Union, they regained their freedom, though their ancestral customs and codes had collapsed, and their beliefs and shamanic practices had been forgotten. They would never be the same again. Our friend Hakambat and his wife Boina once again set out on the journey into the boreal forest, carrying their house with them. Few nomadic Tsatan remain. There are estimated to be just 400 left in southern Russia and northern Mongolia. It is a way of life that is coming to an end, a noble, hospitable people that have been forgotten and are condemned to disappear. They have always been here, and travelers have always been fascinated by their strange customs. In his book of marvels, Marco Polo described them thus: "They are very savage people who live on the animals they trap. But the most extraordinary thing is that they tame large deer and mount them like horses." Over the next few days, the other families will move to the interior of the taiga. We had finished our work and were also setting out on a journey, in our case the journey back home. But part of our hearts remained there, with our friends the Tsatan, the reindeer people of the great boreal forests. At altitudes of between 4,000 and 5,000 meters at the foot of the sacred Apolobamba mountain chain in Bolivia, we discovered very different nomads. They do not lead herds in search of pasture. They are great masters, traditional doctors, inheritors of the knowledge of the great Tawantinsuyu, the Inca Empire. They are the Kayawayas who travel thousands of miles to fulfill their supreme mission of curing the ill. With their bags laden down with remedies on the backs of llamas, they travel to the ends of the former empire, Peru, Ecuador, and even Chile and Argentina. They leave from here, from the Bolivian province of Bautista Saavedra, whose dominant feature is the Apolobamba mountain range and the sacred snow-covered peak of Acamani, the home of Achachila, the grandfather, the Kayawaya ancestral spirit. They left from these small villages hemmed in deep valleys like this one, Kalaya, where today is a holiday. They are waiting for a caravan of Kayawayas that left 2 months ago. Yesterday they saw them coming down the snow-covered slopes, and the villagers have gathered at the outskirts to receive their masters. now descending through the fog. Here, living conditions are extremely harsh. Agriculture is very poor. They still use the sucacoyos or stepped terraces, some from pre-Columbian times, constructed virtually up to the very tops of the mountains. The villages scattered through the many valleys of the region are very isolated. The majority are nothing more than clusters of stone houses with straw roofs. In almost all of them, there are sick people waiting for the arrival of the doctors. Traditionally, the hamlets of Charathani, Curva, Chahaya, Huatawata, Calaya, and Chari have been the centers of Kayawaya training in empiric medicine and magic. We arrive at Charathani after a torturous journey. The narrow dirt tracks that run along the mountain slopes were blocked by landfalls caused by the rain, and at times it took us hours to clear them. Though 1 day later than planned, when we arrived, the people were waiting for us. The village chief spoke a few words of welcome. It was an event. Very few visitors even make it this far. Then we went out to meet the Kayawaya caravan the people of Calaya were waiting for. Thanks to the porters who offered to help us, we were able to move rapidly. We had not had time to get used to the altitude of the almost 5,000 meters of this region. We met the caravan in the valley, already very close to Calaya, where since dawn everyone had gathered to wait. Their journeys are almost never more than 6 months long. They are always back in the new year. But the Kayawayas of Curva sometimes make journeys of up to 3 years. Nowadays, the Kayawayas use cars or even planes and travel great distances with their remedies. But at least once a year, they journey in the traditional manner around the sacred mountains. Each snow-capped peak is the dwelling place of a different spirit, and it is their obligation to visit them and honor them. It is these spirits of the mountains that give them their skill and the wisdom to cure diseases and to sense and predict misfortunes. As they arrived, the village chiefs greeted them, kneeling down before them. They were imbued with the power of the great achachilas of the high peaks. Now, more than ever, they were sacred, wise men. After the greetings and welcoming dances, there are blessings with alcohol, and the table is prepared as an offering to Pachamama, Mother Earth. The women all sit together some distance from the ceremonial table, as tradition demands. They cannot take part directly in the ritual. All dealings with the gods are reserved exclusively for men. Before beginning the invocations, coca leaves are handed out. They are considered sacred. Those assembled devoutly chew them in a kind of communion which unites them and makes them participants in the sacrifices and offerings the officiating sorcerers make. The standard of the old Tawantinsuyu Empire presides over the ceremony as a symbol of the power of their ancestors. The Kayawayas had the privilege of bearing the Inca standard in the ancient rituals dedicated to Inti Raymi, the father-sun god. They know ancient techniques for diagnosing illnesses. The one most frequently used consists of scrutinizing the intestines of the cuy, or guinea pig. They believe that the guinea pig, as it is passed over the body and the head of the patient, absorbs the evil they are suffering from. Immediately, the officiant dissects the animal alive and analyzes its entrails to determine the cause and likely prognosis of the illness. They also diagnose the mental health of the patient, the situation of his home and family, his spiritual relationship with the gods, and whether he has been the victim of some spell or evil eye. In their rituals, the Kayawayas use an esoteric language called Machak Huyai. Its origin is uncertain, though it is normally identified as the secret language of the Incas. The Andean culture has very close links with nature. They believe that the universe is a living being of which humans, plants, stones, mountains, clouds and rivers all form a part, and that everything is harmoniously interrelated. The Pachamama, the Earth Mother, is the personification of this belief. She is the symbol of fertility and the supreme deity of the Andes. The ceremony ends with the blessing of the incense and the burning of the elements that have made up the table: the jambu or llama fat, the sugar figures, the hanks of colored wool, the bars of gold and silver, the copal or resin, the strings of beads. The remains of the guinea pigs they have used become very dangerous objects, as they have absorbed the diseases of the patients, and therefore will have to be buried in a remote secret place, so they cannot infect people or animals. When night falls, the people return to their houses and wait for the healers to visit them. Here their diet is very poor. The daily menu is composed of maize and boiled potatoes. Their houses are generally of just one room. The kitchen is almost never separate from the area where they sleep. A few earthenware utensils and a shelf or two are virtually these people's only possessions. Depending on what the patient is suffering from and whether its origin is physical or magical, the curing ceremonies are performed in the light of day or in the dark of night. Fire is very important for invoking and requesting the assistance of powerful spirits, which are capable of undoing spells. It is also essential to purify and protect the doctors from the diseases and curses they are about to treat.
Dios tataico, Dios yaya cordero. Apo tataico, kuya payawaiko. Apo tataico. Hey, 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 hey. Ya está. Hey, 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 hey.
Meanwhile, under the influence of the moon, another group of Kayawayas makes offerings of llama fetuses to the Achachilas, so they will help them gather the medicinal plants they will use for treatments the following day. They have extensive knowledge of natural medicines. They prepare them using roots, leaves, barks, sulfurous minerals from the Andean volcanoes, and dehydrated animal substances. Many of their remedies have been studied and adopted by Western medicine, such as quinine, used to treat malaria, or unto, a medicinal fungus from which they extract a rudimentary penicillin. Normally, when they arrive at a village, they organize consultations in a house which is easily accessible for the patients. Apart from the guinea pig, they perform diagnoses by checking the patient's pulse and other external signs. Talking to the patient is also essential. From the description of the symptoms and his or her habits, they will know whether the origin of the ailment is some kind of spell. Each patient takes them a bundle of coca leaves. The healers will use them to make sure their diagnosis is right. Once the bundle has been unrolled, the coca leaves take on a specific function in the ceremonial tari. The kayawaya makes a first reading depending on their texture, malleability, shine and color. Then he takes a handful and slowly drops them to see how they fall. Little by little, the healer reaches his diagnosis and explains it to the patient. In this case, it wasn't a spell. The patient is suffering from the bone ailment, which is what they call rheumatism. Before leaving, they give him some coca leaves, which will serve as an analgesic.
Buenas tardes, buenas tardes. Buenas tardes, señor. Presentaremos que echare.
The father of this young girl believes that his daughter is suffering from fright. Here, fright is an illness produced by a strong impression and which gives rise to weakness and loss of spirit. He has brought them a jar of the girl's urine. This is another way they diagnose, through the urine. Sometimes they mix the urine with golpa, that is aluminium sulfate, which produces an effervescence which can be studied and analyzed. Other times, it is enough for them to simply observe the color. They rub an infusion of coca on the girl's legs and tell the father to perform a ceremony in which they appeal to the spirit, one of the main components of the human soul. They will have to use coca leaves, incense, copal, cloves and sugar. These things are necessary to invoke the god of lightning. When the consultations are over, the Kayawayas start to get ready for another journey, another pilgrimage to distant lands, which will enable them to continue fulfilling their eternal mission. The mission of the sacred magicians of the Tiwandinsuyu. These people are dark-haired horsemen from Mongolia, a country covering 1.5 million square kilometers and with just 2.5 million inhabitants. A country of over 37 million head of cattle and almost 8 million horses. Mongolia is a land of nomads. They have lived here for thousands of years, sheltering from one of the harshest climates in the world in their portable homes, the gurs of white cloth, which stand out against such starkly contrasting landscapes as the Siberian taiga or the immense Gobi. In a region of transition between the reindeer of the north and the camels of the south, enduring the freezing winds and heavy snowfalls of winter when temperatures can drop to 50 degrees below zero and the heat of the brief but scorching summer at 40 degrees above. Mongolia is one more example of man's incredible ability to adapt. It is a constant test of human ingenuity and intelligence, a fight without truce against a hostile environment which allows no margin for error. Here, everything is more difficult. Even fishing requires unusual methods. The rivers remain frozen for over 10 months a year, and a few nomad fishermen have to drill through the thick layer of ice in order to get at them. They are an excellent source of proteins, especially in winter when there is no pasture and the cattle rapidly lose weight, especially taking into account that the diet of these people is reduced to dairy products and dried meat. Once they have made a hole in the ice, they lower their lines into the water beneath and wait for the fish to take the bait. But they have to be patient. The waters are dark and the bait is difficult to see. They can only hope to track those fish closest by. Today they've been lucky. They've caught a dark-haired white, one of the most highly appreciated fish in Mongolia. Its meat is white and doesn't taste of mud. Today they'll be able to make a fine fish stew. To speak of Mongols is to speak of horsemen. From when they are young, they are very skilled riders. Nowadays, the occasional motorbike is seen, but the country has virtually no roads, and the horse remains the only means of transport. In the regions of the south, there is very little vegetation. For the fires in their homes, they use cattle dung. It is an ecological fuel which has contributed to conserving the still remaining areas of boreal forest. The gur are comfortable and cozy. In the center stands the fire which, like a stove, heats up the interior. The tonneau, the round opening in the roof, allows the smoke out and the air in. A movable piece of felt on the outside is used to vary the size of the opening or to close it completely when it rains. From the milk, whether it be yaks, goats or mares, they make cheeses, butter, cream, yogurt, and the traditional tea boiled in milk, the daily drink of the Mongol nomads. They kill the cattle in September, and the rest of the year they eat dried meat which they boil to hydrate it, along with a little yak fat and at times pasta, which they buy at the factories. They have no vegetable products at all. The climate does not permit any type of agriculture. Some photos of families and of Mongol wrestlers, 2 or 3 trunks, the saddles and a few mats complete the decoration of the ger. At the top, hanging down in the center of the tonneau, there is always a blue handkerchief which protects them. It's an amulet that represents the family spirits. From the 16th century on, the majority of nomadic Mongol tribes converted to Tibetan Lamaist Buddhism, but Shamaism is still practiced. They believe that in the sky live 99 spirits. 55 of them dwell in the west of the firmament and are white, wise and benevolent. The other 44 live in the east and are black and evil. The chamans, who are called Udgan if they are women, go into deep trances which allow them to enter the realm of the spirits. In this state, they cure the ill, accompany the souls of the dead to the other world, and protect the clan and its cattle from diabolic spirits. The central element in shamanic ceremonies is the goatskin drum, the drum of peace as it is called. The enormous drumstick used to beat it personifies the flying horse, which transports the soul of the shamans to the kingdom of the dead, to fight against the demons. The most widespread religion among the Mongol nomads is Lamaism, or the Yellow Religion. In every corner of the country you can find small monasteries, at times housing a single Lama monk who dedicates his time to meditation and prayer. In Mongolia, there are all kinds of herds of herbivores and all kinds of herdsmen. Even in the cold regions of the north, there are herds of camels that have adapted to the freezing temperatures of the winter. The dark-haired family of Tsetke and his wife Dabaji have started taking down their ger ready to move north. The ger is the best home a nomad could have. Its round shape offers less resistance to the gale-force winds of the steppes. The layers of canvas, plastic and felt provide insulation against the polar cold, and it is completely portable. At this time of year, before the spring comes to an end, the majority of the nomads of Mongolia move. Hundreds of thousands of families organize their caravans and head northwards, where they can fatten up their cattle on the fresh pasture and acquire the necessary reserves to survive the harsh winter. Everyone helps in dismounting the tent, and in the move, even the children. Normally, some neighbors from nearby gers will also lend a hand. They have lived here since time immemorial, always on the move, but by no means erratically. The nomad travels in a precise direction with a clear purpose, towards fresh pastures or grasslands, towards another well or spring. His territory is not an empty space, but a detailed map on which are clearly marked the routes to follow in each season of the year. Our dark-haired friends are about to leave. Once again, they look to the horizon where they will find a new land in which to set up camp, just as they have always done. Their way of life, passed down from generation to generation, has made them different, unlike the rest of the world, but they are happy and feel proud of being nomads. Tsetsuke and Debati will return here next winter, when the north is covered in snow, thus completing their own particular year-long circular odyssey. As well as horse racing, the national sport is Mongol wrestling. After performing the eagle dance to honor the judges, the wrestlers grab hold of each other's arms and try to throw their opponents to the ground. The combat comes to an end when one of them falls and his back or the palms of his hands touch the ground. According to the number of combats they win, they are given the titles of falcon, elephant, or lion. The most famous wrestler in Mongolia received the title of powerful, invincible giant. Without a doubt, the Mongols are still extraordinary horsemen. Their small horses are the toughest, most resistant in the world. There are still wild horses in Mongolia which they catch with their urdas and then tame, just as they have done for centuries. Thanks to these horses, Genghis Khan came to rule over the largest land empire in history. From the Yellow River in China to the Danube in the heart of Europe, and including cities such as Moscow, Beijing, Baghdad, or Damascus. The explorers of his army could travel 150 kilometers a day. The main bulk followed them, organized into divisions of 10,000 warriors. Each one had up to 18 horses. Behind them came 40,000 servants and family. Marco Polo said of them, "They are fierce warriors who can spend 2 days on horseback. They sleep on them and can even feed on their blood."